In this video, you're going to learn how to get text-based input from the user. So the user is going to be able to type something in the browser, and we're going to be able to get that data back and do something with it in our JavaScript. We might use it as the note title, the note body, the to-do text, or in the case of this video, we're going to use it as their search filter, allowing them to filter their notes by title or their to-dos by to-do text. Doing this is going to require us to learn a bit more about HTML. What we're going to be exploring right here is the input element. The input element is what we're going to use for various form fields, like a text-based input and others like a checkbox. Let's go ahead and set up our input. I actually meant to put this below my H2, so I'm going to move down there. We are going to open the input tag, and we're not actually going to close the input tag. The input tag, or the input element, is known as an empty element. This is one that does not take something between the two tags. So for the H1, it makes a lot of sense to put something between the two tags. We put our title. For the paragraph, we put our paragraph text. For the button, we put the button text. With the input, there is nothing that goes inside, so we actually set it up like this. This syntax is going to look a little weird at first, but we are going to be working with a lot of inputs throughout the course, and you'll get comfortable with these empty elements in no time. Now, if we were to go ahead and save the browser in its current state, what would we see? Well, let's go ahead and save it and see what we get. What do we get? We get a little text field. I can click this field. I can type some value right inside. And this is fantastic. This is the text-based input we were hoping for. Now, the input element is very flexible. There are all sorts of different types of inputs we can work with. The default one, though, is this text-based input. Now, specifying the input type actually comes from the type attribute, and there is a default value, the one we're seeing. So we could set up an attribute on input, type, and set it equal to, in quotes, text. What we're seeing here is the text-based input. So if I were to save things and head over to the browser, we can see we're getting the exact same behavior we had before. Leaving that off is exactly the same as adding a type of text. Now, just to prove that there are other types of inputs, let's go ahead and switch that value up real quick. I'm going to switch it from a text-based input to a password-based input. This is going to show a password field where we can still type some values in, but they're replaced with a dot obfuscating what the password actually is. Now, the little icon coming right here, this is from LastPass, a browser extension, a password manager. You're not going to be seeing that since you most likely don't have it installed, but you should see the obfuscated password in the text input. Now, for our cases, we don't want to use a password field. We do want the user to be able to see the thing they're searching for. So I am going to switch this back over to a text-based input. From here, what I want to explore is how we can capture the value in JavaScript when the user actually types something in. Before we do that, I want to pull up the documentation for input so you know where it lives. Over in my Docs tab, I'm going to search MDN input. Then we're going to head over to the input tag page. And on here, we can take a look at their little live example down below, and you'll see they're using the exact same syntax we're using. There is no closing tag. They simply set up the input opening tag, they add on their type attribute, and in this case, they've also chosen to add an ID so they can better target this input, something we'll be doing in a little bit. Down below that, what do we get? We get a little bit of information about this element. The one I want to point out is permitted content. If you were to read permitted content for something else, like a paragraph, it would talk about exactly what's allowed to go inside of there. But the permitted content for the input says none, because it is an empty element as mentioned. If we click this link, we can actually get brought over to a list of all of the elements in HTML that are considered empty elements. Here we have maybe 18 different ones, input being one of them. Now let's go ahead and switch over to JavaScript and figure out how we can attach a meaningful event onto this input. I am going to go ahead and give it an ID so we can target it. ID equals, right here, I'll use search text for this one. I'm going to save that file, switch over to Notes app, and add my event listener down at the bottom. I'll use document.query selector. I'm going to grab that input by its ID, so hash search hyphen text. Then I'm going to use add event listener to add an event listener. And there are two events we're going to explore with our text-based inputs. The one I want to start off with is change. So I'm going to type change in as the string value for that first argument. Then we're going to set up a function as the second argument. In here, we are going to get access to an event like we do for all of our event listeners, and we can use e.target to take a peek at the input. For the moment, let's just print that, console.log e. Now what I'm going to do is save the file, head over to the browser, and make some changes. Now if I just type in a few characters, you're going to notice that nothing prints over in the console. It's only when I click away or remove the focus from this input, the event actually fires. Over here, we are getting that event object, and if I open it up, I can see that this is the correct one. The type of this event is change, and the target is indeed my input. Now, if I go into the target, what we're interested in is how to get that value, type sum. We can just take a look at all of the attribute values to see where it actually shows up. And if we scroll all the way to the bottom, the attribute value that we're going to use is called, appropriately, value. Right down here, we have value, and it is a string type sum. So this is where we can access the data that the user typed in. It's also where we can override the data from JavaScript. So think of value as a similar concept to text content with our other elements. I can read an H1's text value using text content. I can also set it using text content. The same is true with our inputs using value. Let's go ahead and actually print that so it shows up. e.target. This gives us access to the element, the input, and we access its value property. Now if we were to go ahead and repeat the exact same thing, removing some characters and typing some new ones, and removing the focus, what do we get? We get our misspelled string showing up to the console. Now this event is a good start, but clearly the change event isn't going to work for us because I want to filter in real time. So if I type T, I want to see the data change. If I type test, I want to see it filter. I don't want to need to click away or click some sort of button in order for the event to actually fire. Well, there is an alternative to the change event. That is the input event. The input event is going to fire on every single character change. So if we save the file with the input event in place, I can see that I don't have a message, but if I remove a single character, the string shows up automatically. So as I type every single letter, that callback function fires and I get access to the latest data. This is going to allow me to filter my notes, my to-dos, or my expenses in real time as the user types. So we're going to be using the input event with our text-based inputs, allowing us to access that latest information. There's another attribute for the input that's going to serve us well, and this is the placeholder attribute, another very common one for our text-based inputs. Placeholder, set up like this, allows us to provide a little sample text in that input when there is no value. So I could say something like filter to-dos, for example. Now, if I save things, we actually don't see that text anywhere. It only comes up when the user has nothing typed. So if I remove everything from the input, I can see we get our filter to-dos placeholder. And as I start typing, I can see the placeholder comes away, the real values show up, and I am getting the event firing 6 times for the 6 different states the input was in. So that's where we're going to stop with inputs for the moment. In the next video, we're actually going to wire this up to filter the data and render the filtered data, meaning that we'll only see notes that actually match our text input value. What I would like you to do is create a new input, and this input for your to-do application will be where the user eventually types in the text of the to-do they would like to add. So you can go ahead and set that up. You can set it up as an input. You can give it a reasonable ID like new to do. You can set up a placeholder like type your to do here. And then I also want you to listen for changes and just print the new to do text to the screen as it actually changes. So if I were to type it in somewhere down at the bottom or the top of this page, I would expect to see the text change as I change the value. Don't worry about doing anything with it just yet. We'll get to that in a little bit. For now, just create that input and set up the input event handler. Take a moment to pause the video, knock it out, and when you're done, come back and click play. All right, let's go ahead and knock this one out. We have our add to do button right here. So if I'm going to be setting up an input that the user is going to type their new to do text in, I'll put it right above. An input. I'm going to give this one an ID. The ID for this one could be something like new to do text. Whatever you typed in is fine. It does not need to match this exactly. We know by default we are going to have a type set equal to text, but I'm going to explicitly set it for clarity's sake, and I'll also set a placeholder. Placeholder, enter something to do. Excellent. Now we're going to close off the tag, and remember, input is an empty element. It does not take a closing tag. We set it up just like this. This is step one. We should see the input field being correctly rendered over here. Enter something to do. We have our button just to the right. Now we're going to wire things up to actually print the text as it changes. Over here, let's go ahead and do just that. Now, the to-do app.js file has gotten a little more out of hand than our notes app.js file, but don't worry, we will come back and clean a lot of this up in the next video as we actually filter and render multiple times. Down below or anywhere in the file, all I wanted you to do was add an event listener. Listen for to-do text change. Down below, document.query selector. Since we're targeting a specific element by its ID, I'll use the hash sign. What did I call that one? I called it new to do text. New to do text. I'm going to access the add event listener on that element. I'm going to pass in the two arguments. The first one is the event. Now, you could have used change, but as I mentioned, change really isn't ideal. For almost all situations, we want to know what the new value is as it changes, so we're going to use input instead. Then we set up our function. In the function, we get our event argument, giving us a bit of information about the input event that fired, and all we wanted to do was log the text. So console.log, I'm going to print the new to do text e.target.value. Excellent. Now that we have this in place, we can actually test things out. Let's say I want to do something new, like film a video. As I type those words in the input, I can see all of the text values showing up here, the last one being the final one typed. And there we have it. We now know a little bit about inputs and how to listen for their changes. In the next video, we're basically going to continue the logical step from here. What we're going to do is use this data in a meaningful way. We're going to render our notes and filter them based off of that changing data, and we'll do the exact same thing with our to-dos, filtering them by their text value. I'm super excited to get to that. Let's go ahead and just jump right in.